So to descend down from the platonic ideals of the left and the right, well, who is actually running the show on the right and the left? Who are the dominant forces? Maybe you could describe, and you mentioned democratic socialists, the progressives, maybe liberals, maybe more sort of mainstream left, and the same on the right with Trump and Trumpism.
So on the right, it's pretty straightforward at the moment. And the right is composed differently than it was 10 years ago. But the right is run by Donald Trump and the people who have been given the nod of power by Donald Trump. So that is right now Elon Musk, but Elon Musk's power is coming from Donald Trump. That is, maybe in some degrees J.D. Vance, maybe in some degrees Russ Vought, maybe sometimes, Homans over at DHS. The right, beneath that, the Republicans in Congress are extraordinarily disempowered compared to in other administrations. They are sort of being told what to do, and they are doing what they are told. Republicans in Congress, Senate Republicans, they didn't want Pete Hegseth. They didn't want Kash Patel. They didn't want Tulsi Gabbard. They didn't want RFK Jr. Nobody got elected to be a Republican in the Senate, hoping that they would confirm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a member of the Kennedys, a Democrat who was pro-choice and running as a Democrat 2 years ago, for HHS. But Donald Trump told them to do it, and they did. So the right has developed a very, very top-down structure. And one of Trump's talents, one of the things that makes him a disruptive force in politics, is his ability to upend the sort of coalitional structure, the interest group structure that used to prevail. The Koch brothers were the big enemy of the left, 10, 15 years ago. The View was that in many ways they set the agenda of the right. The Koch brother network is much less powerful under Donald Trump because he just disagrees with them and has disempowered them. Not to say none of their people or none of their groups are meaningful at all. They are, but you wouldn't put them at the forefront in the way that you might have at another time. Right this second, we're using the left, but Democrats are in fundamental disarray. There is no leader. Senate Democrats, decided to vote for the continuing resolution avoiding a shutdown, or a critical mass of them did. Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the House Democrats, and Chuck Schumer, the leader of Senate Democrats, are in bitter disagreement over whether or not they should have done that. Democratic leadership isn't even united on the single biggest point of leverage they might have had. They disagree over whether or not it was even a point of leverage. Outside of them, the party has no leader, which is fairly normal after a pretty crushing defeat. But there isn't the next in line. So, you go back, right? And it was pretty clear that, after Barack Obama, it was going to be Hillary Clinton. After Hillary Clinton, it was either going to be Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders had come in second in the primary. Joe Biden had been the vice president. You often have a presumptive next nominee who the party can look to for a kind of leadership. Even after 2000, Al Gore was still giving big speeches. There was a question about Al Gore running again. There is no presumptive in the Democratic Party right now. You can't turn around and say, oh, it's going to be Pete Buttigieg, it's going to be Josh Shapiro, it's going to be Gretchen Whitmer. Absent, parties are given force. Modern parties, which are quite weak by historical standards, modern parties tend to be given force by a centralizing personality. Donald Trump being a very strong example of that on the right, but Barack Obama was the person who held together the Democratic Party for a long time. In my lifetime, the Democratic Party has never been as internally fragmented and weak, leaderless, rudderless as it is right now. Now, it won't stay that way. There's a rhythm to these things. There'll be a midterm. They're probably going to pick up a bunch of seats in the midterm. If that means Hakeem Jeffries becomes speaker after the midterm, he's going to have a much louder voice because he's going to have power. It's going to be a harder road for Schumer to get back to the majority because of the Senate map. And then we'll start having a primary on the left. And you'll begin to see voices emerge out of that. But right now, the Democratic Party, it doesn't have points of power. There's simply, outside of, at the national level, there is no Democrat who wields control over a branch of government, right? They don't have the Supreme Court, they don't have the House, they don't have the Senate, they don't have the presidency, and they don't have a next in line. So you're looking at an organization without any of the people in a position to structure it, and the head of the DNC, the new head Ken Martin, doesn't have power in that way. So it's they're pretty fractured.
You got a lot of criticism for this, but you were one of the people that early on said that Biden should step down. Why is the Democratic Party at this stage in its history so bad at generating the truly inspiring person. To me personally, AOC is an example of a person that might be that person.
You should have her on the show.
What?
I would watch that.
Definitely. But I really try to, and we'll talk about this. I try to do like 2-3 hours, and there's a hesitancy on the left, especially to do these kinds of long programs. I think it's a trust issue. I'm not exactly sure what it is. 80% of the people on the show are left wing. I'm pretty good faith, and I try to bring out the best in people.
Have you invited her? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, we'll see what happens when people get closer to 2028.
Sure.
Maybe people begin taking that kind of risk.
I hope so. Bernie's up there in age, so he can't do it anymore. Why is the Democratic Party so bad at generating
I
this
don't
kind of
think
talent?
it's so bad at generating them. I think that it turned out to be bad at generating them this year. Look, like as you mentioned, back in February 2023, I was somebody who came out and said, like, Biden can't run again. This isn't going to work. And my view, and that was really what that set of pieces was about the argument that even though Biden was clearly going to win the primary, that there was still time for Democrats to do something the parties had done in the past and have an open convention. And you could structure the lead up to an open convention in a number of different ways, right? You could have something like a mini primary, but basically you'd have Democrats out in the media, out giving speeches, and their ultimate audience would be the delegates at the Democratic National Convention. And my hope was through that you would find the person for this moment. The thing for Kamala Harris that was really difficult was she was for another moment. She was picked by Joe Biden in 2020 amidst just a very different political equilibrium, a sense that you had a transitionary moment between two versions of the Democratic Party. Maybe Joe Biden reaching a little bit back to the past, to these sort of lunch pail, blue collar Democrats. Joe from Scranton was a big part of the Joe Biden appeal. But also Biden never has a chance if he's not Barack Obama's vice president. And so you have this sort of weird set of historical factors like operating at the same time. There's a desire for stability and experience amidst the chaos of Donald Trump and the pandemic. There is Biden as Obama's vice president, who nevertheless did not run in the election after Obama. I think a lot of people look back at 2016 and think, you know what, if Biden had been the candidate, he would have beaten Trump and we would live in a different reality. And then Biden chose Harris as an effort to shore up his own at least assumed weaknesses, right? He's a white man in the Democratic Party at a time when the Democratic Party is diversifying. And when the view of how you win elections is you put back together the Obama coalition. And the Obama coalition is young people, it's voters of color, and it's enough working class white voters and then college educated white voters, right? That's the Obama coalition. And so Biden picks Harris, for different reasons. My view at that time was I was sort of a Tammy Duckworth person and thought I should have picked Tammy Duckworth. But there are different people out there. And then the kind of moment that Harris was running in just sort of dissipates. First, she has a particular background from California where she's a tough on crime. Her book is called Smart on Crime Prosecutor. But she runs in the Democratic Party at a time when it's turned on that kind of politics. People want a lot from her personally, but they don't want a sort of prosecutorial character. So she sort of abandons that and never, I think, really finds another political identity, certainly before she begins running, in 2024 that works. But she's a talented debater. She's a very talented performer on the stump, but she doesn't really have a theory of politics and policy that she's identified with. But she's a way for Biden to signal that he understands that him being, in 2020, a 78-year-old white guy, he understands the future is not him, or at least not just him. And he's sort of trying to make a coalitional pick that speaks to his own, potential weaknesses. I think by 2024, you have two problems, right? Once he only steps down, what is it, June? Like they are weeks from the DNC. They don't have time anymore for an open convention. You now have the Biden administration is very unpopular for a number of reasons, but particularly inflation and cost of living. So now you have Kamala Harris running with the sort of anvil of being associated. I mean, it's a Biden-Harris administration. She doesn't really have a lane on cost of living. It's not something she's known for working on in the Senate. It's not something she has a bunch of great ideas about, not something she's great at talking about. It's probably not the candidate you would pick for a cost of living election. And she's had no time to build that out, right? Maybe if she had been running in a primary for, a year and a half, having to fend off Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg and whomever else, she either would have figured out how to do it, right? Primaries are periods of education and learning for the candidates too, or they would have found somebody else who could do it. But she doesn't get any of that, right? She's thrown into the game with 3 months to go. So, they picked the candidate in 2020 who won. Whether you think Biden's inspiring or not, he was a reasonable pick for that moment. He should have never run for a second term, and he sort of implied to a lot of people that he wouldn't. And then the handover to Harris was a very difficult handover to a candidate who didn't go through any kind of selection process for the moment at which he was running. We'll see what they do in 2028, but the consequences of what they did in 2024 have been severe.
There's two really big questions on the table that I think click together in an interesting way. You asked, one, why did Trump win? And two, why do Democrats have this certain communication style that might make them less interested in coming onto an unstructured 3-hour conversation with you? Let me try to tell a story that connects them. I think Trump's victory in 2024 was overdetermined. There are a lot of factors here. Number one, if you look internationally, incumbents lost all over the world. They lost in the US, they lost in Europe, they lost in pretty much every developed country at rates that we really haven't seen in 50 years. And that's largely because the inflation crisis that came after COVID created an absolute disaster for incumbent establishment power. People couldn't bring prices down, voters were furious, and they were destroying establishment orders all over the world. Democrats happened to be in power, and as a result, they got the brunt of it. That's number one. Number two, if you look at elections over the 21st century, two things are true. One, almost every election is unbelievably close. For reasons that I'm not sure I entirely understand, the parties have gotten really good, historically, bizarrely good, at getting each group to come to the polls with about 48%, such that every election is a battle over the next 1.5%. And in a world like that, little thermostatic swings are very important. And what we've seen over the last few years, and there's this theory about thermostatic public opinion in American politics that says that what often happens in politics is one party has a very compelling message of change, they become the establishment, and then they become the victims of exactly the weapon that they marshaled. That then the next outgroup party says, we have a theory of change and we're going to throw out the bums. And the next party comes in and they overreach and then they lose. In a world where you have thermostatic change and every election is very close, you tend to have elections swinging back and forth. So I think that also explains why Democrats and Republicans have struggled to hold on to power for 6-year, 8-year, 12-year terms the same way they did, say, in the 1930s or 1960s. But finally, you have to look at what kind of character Donald Trump is and what kind of a media figure he is. We were just talking off camera about how every age of communications technology revolution clicks into focus a new skill that is suddenly in critical demand for the electorate. Right? The world of radio technology is a world in which Franklin Delano Roosevelt can be powerful in a way that he can't be in the 1890s. And then you have the 1950s. Dwight Eisenhower, 1956, I believe, was the first televised national convention. Famously, the 1960 presidential debates between JFK and Richard Nixon take an election that is leaning toward Nixon and make it an election that's leaning toward JFK because he's so damn handsome and also just electrically compelling on a screen. We have a new screened technology right now, which is not just television on steroids. It's a different species entirely. And it seems to provide value for individuals, influencers, and even celebrities and politicians who are good at something like live wire authenticity. They're good at performing authenticity, as paradoxical as that sounds. Trump is an absolute marvel at performing authenticity, even when the audience somehow acknowledges that he might be bullshitting. He's just an amazing performer for this age. And it speaks to the fact that he seems to be, to borrow Ezra's term, remarkably disinhibited in front of every single audience. There doesn't seem to be this sort of background algorithm in his head calculating exactly how to craft his message to different audiences. He just seems to be like a live wire animal in front of every audience. And I think that compares very distinctly to the democratic character of bureaucratic caution in our age.
Yeah.
And there is a really important distinction between this vibe of the Trumpian ruler and the vibe of the rule follower. And the vibe of the bureaucratic rule follower is a little bit afraid of unstructured conversation, is always performing the background algorithm of how do I communicate in a way that balances all of the coalitions on my side? Because if you look at the Democratic Party right now to compare to the Republican Party, I mean, in 2015, I think there were 4 political parties in America. There was MAGA, there was the center right, there was the Bernie wing, and there was the Biden, Clinton, Obama wing. And what happened is that Trump killed and skinned the center right and is now wearing it as a hat. The entire Republican Party is Donald Trump wearing the skins of the old center right, the Romney wing. And the Democratic Party is still a fight. It's exactly what Ezra described. It's a jungle. And maybe there's something about that jungle nature of the Democratic Party that is making some of its leaders perform this sort of coalitional calculation when they're communicating, such that it makes them less interested in appearing in settings that might cost them, that might not benefit them in exactly the sort of pre-calculated way they have to get their message across. And so there's not necessarily a whole lot of empirics to that theory. I'm a little bit going on vibes here, and maybe Ezra sees some flaws to the theory.
It's an age of the vibe.
It is the age of the vibe. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm trying to perform the live wire authenticity that I'm describing. But I do think that might begin to explain why you, Lex, might be picking up on a difference between the political vibes, an eagerness and a willingness on the one hand to have kind of unstructured and even chaotic conversations, and a care on the other side about not letting conversations become too unstructured or too careless.
Can I build on that? I know we're supposed to talk about abundance, but I want to talk about this.
There's an abundance of time.
An abundance of time. We're on the Lex Fridman Show. So 2 or 3 things. One is Democrats still think the currency of politics is money and the currency of politics is attention. And that's a huge difference between the two sides right now. So what did Kamala Harris come in and do? She came in and raised a shit ton of money, right? Like $1 billion in, record time, basically. She had more money than Donald Trump did and used it to try to buy attention. What it meant for Democrats to be good at social media is to have a good social media team. People in your office somewhere, in your campaign headquarters, who put out cool things on social media, good memes and good advertisements and so on. What it means on the right to be good at social media is to be you personally good at social media. You're Vivek Ramaswamy, you're JD Vance, you're Donald Trump, you're Elon Musk, and what you understand is you are the product. What it means to be good at attention is you are good at attention. Now, Harris, I think, was actually better at some dimensions of this. They were just slightly older dimensions and people always gave her credit for. Hell of a performer on the stump. She was way better on the stump than people realized she would be. And a good debater. She'd always been a good debater. She trashed Donald Trump in that debate. But she does not do social media herself at any level, right? Because she's not going to take risk. Most Democrats still live in a world where the thing that they are optimizing for in attention is to not get negative attention. And what the Trumpist wing of the Republican Party understands, and this is truer for them than it probably would be for Democrats, because for them, the media is the enemy, or at least the mainstream media is, etc., but is that attention, a volume of attention is itself good, and you can only get a critical mass of it if you're willing to accept negative attention. Agenda control doesn't come from positive attention, it comes from conflict. You get agenda control by doing things the other side disagrees with, so they enter into functioning agreement with you to keep the thing you're doing at the front. Now, that doesn't make you highly popular. Donald Trump is the most unpopular modern president at this stage of his presidency, except for Donald Trump's first term. It took, I think Nate Silver said it was 221 days for Joe Biden's net favorability to go negative. It's taken something like 55 days for Donald Trump to do the same. So what Donald Trump is doing does not optimize for favorability. It does not optimize, by the way, for big wins. Democrats feel like they got trashed in 2024, and in a way they did. But Trump's popular vote victory was the smallest popular vote victory since 2000, when Al Gore, beat George W. Bush by 17 dogs and 3 old men, or whatever it was. And so attention works really differently. And while I think some of the the Rogan of the left discourse has been frankly overstated, because honestly, the most parsimonious model of 2024 and 2020 is in 2020, you have a 48-48 nation, something like that. Or maybe you have something that's more like a 49 Democrat, 47 Republican nation. And in 2020, because of the pandemic, Donald Trump suffered let's call it a 2.5 point incumbent penalty. People are mad about the pandemic. They're mad about things being chaotic. So he loses 2.5 points. That gives, given the natural split of the electorate, Joe Biden a 4.5 point popular vote victory. In 2024, people are mad about inflation. They're somewhat mad about the border. You have a 2.5 point penalty applied to the incumbent administration. Now it's Harris. And you get a 1.5 point popular vote victory for Donald Trump. I genuinely don't think, and this held internationally too, right? I genuinely don't think you need a lot more to explain the election right now than that. But you do need something more than that to explain Donald Trump's now, since 2016, almost decade-long dominance of all attention in American politics. Starting when he came down the golden escalator in 2015, Donald Trump, American politics from 2015 to 2020, when Joe Biden won, was about Donald Trump. Then from 2020 to 2024, when Joe Biden was president, it was about Donald Trump. And then from 2024 on, it's about Donald Trump. Joe Biden was an attentional void, be it his age, be it their strategy. They agreed that the topic of the nation should be Donald Trump, right? When he went back to begin his campaign in 2024, he goes to Valley Forge and gives a speech about January 6th and Donald Trump, right? It wasn't about his own achievements. It was about Donald Trump. Joe Biden didn't do the Super Bowl interview, right? In 2023, that's when I did my thing about this is not going to work. Like, probably because at that point he was not capable of good extemporaneous interviews. I mean, I think that was my view of them, right? That the revealed thing here was that they didn't trust him to do interviews. I didn't have some inside information about anything. I just looked at what they were doing and what they weren't doing. They're behind in the polls. They weren't doing things like the Super Bowl interview. If you can't turn your candidate into the product, if you don't trust your candidate to be the product, in an election, you're fucked, right? And so that was to me the tell. But attention is the coin of the realm. Now, there are better and worse ways of doing it. I don't think Donald Trump is doing himself huge favors right now. I think there was a path they could have walked to be a majority party. I think that if he was more restrained, more inhibited, if he was able to not do a bunch of things that are mobilizing opposition to him, you could talk about what they would or wouldn't achieve that way, but I think they could be in a much stronger political position. That would make them stronger for the midterms. It would eventually make, J.D. Vance stronger as a successor. I think they're running a very high risk strategy that has a very reasonable chance of, if they don't make a, what I would call like an autocratic breakthrough, they might completely blow up their own movement, right? It's all very high risk. So for them, like for everybody, for everything, what makes them good at politics is also what makes them bad at politics. But for Democrats, the caution, the sort of bureaucratic culture, the fear of saying anything that will make anybody mad, it is optimized for a different attentional era. And one of the things that I am watching when you were saying about leaders, one of the things I'm watching in the people coming up, the ones who want to run in 2028, is who seems like they have adapted to this era, not in the way Trump did or Vance did or Musk did. I think they're going to need something different. They fully represent the Twitter era of politics. I mean, Musk bought Twitter. They're sort of all in on what politics right now, what online politics feels like. I think the thing that will come next is someone who's able to synthesize both the lessons of it and the feeling that we all have that it's kind of sick and poisoned, right? That Twitter's not a good place. X is not a good place. TikTok politics is not a good place, that we're all being turned on each other. Somehow you need to be authentic and authentically angry at what we've all become, in the way that Obama ran as a political reformer who hated the red and blue cut of America, who hated what political consultants and pollsters were doing to us. You're not going to have somebody who just echoes. There will be no Joe Rogan of the left. There will be no Donald Trump of the left, because the left is different than the right. But it will have to be something authentically of this era, but also authentic to the backlash to it, which I think as we enter into this period where the president and everybody around him fully embraces this attentional economy, I think people are going to want something different from this attentional economy in 4 years.
And be okay with the negative attention that comes with being authentic.
You're going to have some of it, right? You cannot change American politics. You can't change the Democratic Party if you're not willing to upset people. Donald Trump reformed the Republican Party by being able to fight Republicans. He ran against George W. Bush, against Jeb Bush, against Mitt Romney, against the trade deals, against a bunch of things that were understood to be sacred cows. Somehow this guy ran, like right after Mitt Romney and John McCain, while attacking Mitt Romney and John McCain, right? If you are not, like, the Democratic Party does need to change. It needs to attain a different form because the Obama coalition is exhausted. It's done. It's not going to be able to do that if it doesn't have standard bearers who are willing to say, we were wrong about some things. we have to change our views on some things. We have to act differently and speak differently.
Is there a degree to which the left uniquely attacks its own more intensely than maybe other parts of the political spectrum?
It's possible. You go back to the model that I gave you of 2015, where there used to be these four large parties: MAGA, center right, center left, and left. Right now, the Republican Party is all MAGA. So there is no coalitional fight to be had. It's all Donald Trump. And if Donald Trump wants to name a former left-wing environmentalist to be the HHS secretary, everyone says, okay, that sounds like a fantastic idea. That's exactly who we were going to nominate too. Thank you, Donald. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Tip of my tongue. On the Democratic side, there is a fight. And it's happening right now. And our book is trying to win a certain intra-left coalitional fight about defining the future of liberalism in the Democratic Party. So I'm not of the left. I'm certainly not of the far left. I have center-left politics and maybe even like a center-left personality style, if we can even call it that. But I do not begrudge the left for fighting because there's a fight to be had. In many ways, I think sometimes they see, I'm not endorsing this, I'm describing it. I think they see their near-term opposition as not always the Republican Party, but as the forces of the Democratic Party that are in the way for them controlling one of the two major parties in this country. And so they do have an oppositional style, and maybe that's personality-based. They are fighting the center-left. They are criticizing the center-left consistently. But I want to be good faith about this, even though I don't share their politics, and say that they're doing it because they're trying to win power on the left of center. And so that's why they're criticizing the way they are. Now, our book and much of my writing is an attempt to do a little bit of a very specific dance. Ezra touched on this, I think, really beautifully. We're in an era right now of anti-institution politics, anti-establishment politics. And Democrats are at risk right now as being seen as the party that always defends institutions, the party that always defends the establishment status quo. And that is an absolute death knell, I think, for this century's angry anti-establishment politics. So what we're trying to do is essentially say, here's a way to channel the anger that people have at the establishment, but toward our own ends, right? We believe that we have answers on housing and energy and high-quality governance and science and technology, really good answers that are fiercely critical of the status quo in Democrat-led cities and Democrat-led states. We're trying to be oppositional in a way that's constructive rather than just destructive.